So I do deal with video games. I don't have any cool video games to show you today, though. But we're going to be talking about educational reform, which I think is so important, because with a lot of my work doing video games, again and again I encounter situations where it's challenging, it's difficult to actually structure the games in a way where we can use them in the classroom. So I kind of started with video games, but moved into, we have problems, we need to really change the system as a whole so these video games can work. So I'm going to be talking to you about educational reform today. If you haven't been paying attention, and I'd kind of be shocked if you haven't seen this, educational reform is getting a lot of attention these days. But this isn't really anything new. A report came out in the early 80s called A Nation at Risk, done by the federal government, and it said that our schools were dangerously failing. Big time statement there, okay? But really, since the mid-80s to now, not really a whole lot has changed, except that push for reform has now moved out into our magazines, our TV shows, our movies, even into our State of the Union addresses. A more recent report, 2012, said that our schools were actually a threat to national security. I'm serious. Condoleezza Rice said that our country faces perhaps no greater security challenge than education. So a lot of doom and gloom going around. But what if I were to tell you that our schools are actually operating at a near optimal level of performance? Is that possible? Can schools be performing optimally but still be totally inadequate? Well, it's possible and it's true. See, the thing is, our schools have been using the same model of education for a very long time now, and they're very, very good at applying it. The problem is, we haven't really had a significant paradigm shift in education since the Industrial Revolution. Before then, schools were in the one schoolhouse model. Suddenly, everyone moves into the cities to take the factory jobs, so schools are tasked with educating mass numbers of students. Furthermore, these students are largely going to be educated to work in the factories themselves one day. So schools adopted a factory model of education, perfect for the industrial age. In the factory model of education, we group students into grade levels based on their age. We give them all the same amount of time to learn the same content. Now, luckily, as we all know, all children are exactly the same as each other. Right, I was just checking to see if you're paying attention. Everyone knows we're all individuals with our own strengths and weaknesses, our own interests and passions. Now, treating everyone as if they're the same when you know they're not is not a problem in the industrial age model, the factory model, because you're actually not that interested in learning. You're focused on sorting students. If we know people are different, but we give them the same amount of time to learn the same content, we're forcing their performance to vary. So we're sorting them into those who can learn in the amount of time they're given and those who cannot. Those who can learn move on through the system. Those who cannot acquire learning deficiencies and fail. So this is perfect for generating two classes of worker, the factory line worker who follows orders and the manager who gives them. The problem is, by and large, we don't live in that world anymore. We live in an increasingly dynamic world. We're seeing massive change, whether it's social or technological. Everything's speeding up. Today, we need complex problem solvers. We need collaborators. We need lifelong learners. People aren't working in the same job or even in the same career or multiple careers anymore. You're having to learn all the time. So why are all our educational reforms failing? They're failing because we're trying to slap wings on a car in order to fly. You don't try to drive a square peg in a round hole, you design a round peg. Factory model was never meant to do what we are forcing it and asking it to do. So if we're talking about a system that's focused, a school that's focused on actually providing learning for all students, what might that look like? Well, it would look very different than the factory model today. In the factory model, we've got people in their grades, we have people in their classes. In a customized model of education, grade levels. We don't need them anymore. The purpose of a grade level is to group students as if they're the same. If we know students are different, but we're giving them the same amount of time to learn the content, we're forcing their learning to vary. We're forcing some of them to fall behind. Without grade levels, The grade level focus is basically saying all you 12-year-olds are the same. That's forcing those who can't learn in that amount of time to fall behind. It's also forcing those who could learn more quickly to slow down and wait for the others to catch up. It's not an accident that many of our most gifted students struggle in this system. They are bored out of their minds. It's also not an accident that our disadvantaged students feel like the system is stacked against them, because it is. So no grade levels, no classes. Classes are another way that we're grouping the students. A class lasts a finite amount of time, and then it moves on, whether you've learned or not. We're also, with these classes, dividing them up into these disciplines, as if a mathematician never uses English skills, or a scientist never uses math skills. It's an artificial remnant of a system that's focused on delivering content rather than actually teaching real-world problem-solving skills and applied knowledge. What about math and English? Okay, classes. We've got these disciplines here like this. It's an artificial way of structuring things. You know, when I was in school, I was pretty good at English, read a lot at home, I liked reading and writing. I wasn't too bad at math either. But there came to be a time, sometime around the 5th grade or so, where I hit a patch where I was struggling a little bit. I just need a little bit more time to kind of get things. But the system does not allow for that. Whether or not the teacher wants to give me that time, there's no choice there. So I moved on. Now, I didn't struggle so badly that I failed, but I acquired learning deficiencies, gaps in my knowledge. So suddenly, I believe I'm no longer good at math. But what's a school really going to be looking like if we don't have classes, if we don't have grade levels? That's a radical vision that's so different from what we had been doing before. Well, students are going to be working on projects now, projects that are connected to requirements that are in their personalized learning plans. Teachers are going to be freed up from having to focus on delivering content to actually being able to focus on teaching, facilitating learning. You know, I once observed a history teacher using video games to teach World War II history in his class. He only did this for 1 week of the year. It was the perfect example of a learner-centered versus a teacher-centered sort of environment. We observed him before he used the video game, and he was great. He was up at the front of the class, he was telling jokes, he was telling stories, he was firing off questions, calling on students, putting forth so much energy and effort to keep them engaged while they sat there and stared at him. And by the end of the period, a lot of them were struggling to fall asleep, and he was a great teacher. We observe him using the video game in class, and it's a totally different environment. Students are engaged. They're collaborating with each other. It's really loud in there. And this passion spilled out into the hallways. They're talking about gameplay around their lockers and even over lunch. And the teacher, he was practically doing laps around the classroom, answering questions, looking for what he called teachable moments to really drive their learning home. And he said it was his most exhausting and most exhilarating and most fun week of the year because the students were engaged and they were interested and they were asking him questions and they were forcing him to push his own knowledge. Dare to imagine a world where a student demonstrates her social studies and English skills by writing a persuasive speech against ag-gag legislation and then delivering that speech to her state legislators. Or demonstrating her science, technology, engineering, and math skills by designing a new model airplane, testing in a virtual wind tunnel, and then reporting on the results of that test and her plans for redesign. Or collaborating with her local museum on creating a virtual historical tour of her town. Or conducting and capturing interviews with Holocaust survivors. Children are passionate about their learning if you allow them to use their passions to learn. This sort of new paradigm system will have projects that support meeting learning requirements while also supporting passion. Now, if students are working on their own projects at their own pace, we know technology will need to be a big part of this. It will be needed to plan for their learning, to store assessments, to track and report on where they are, And if they're working on these projects, those projects are creating evidence of what they are competent at doing, what they have mastered, what they have learned. So we need e-portfolio or digital badge systems that will store these projects as evidence of what these students are capable of. If you take math class right now, you're going to be given a grade at the end of that. That tells us nothing other than how you compare to your peers. It doesn't tell us anything about what you can actually do. With this project sort of instruction, project-based assessment, we are creating evidence of learning. So students can now say to their parents, look what I can do, instead of look what I scored on this test. Now, I have a colleague who moved his family across the country so his exceptionally gifted son could enroll in this sort of customized education model school. Let's just hope the school sticks around long enough in that format for his younger siblings to actually enroll too. It's so easy for these schools to be pulled back to the status quo. Solitary schools exist in the systems around them that pull them back to do what everyone else is doing. I once gave a talk about a new paradigm, this new paradigm model of education, and a woman in the audience got very excited. And she said to me, I went to a school just like what you're talking about. I was failing in my regular high school. I went to this new school, and suddenly learning was fun. I was doing better than I ever had. And I said, that's great. Where was this school? And she said, well, it's right here in Indianapolis. But it's not like that anymore. Solitary schools have the system stacked against them to bring them back to where they are. In order to actually make this change, we have to be audacious. We have to build support, broad support across the entire community. That means we can't put all the responsibility on the schools and teachers anymore, but parents have to be involved. Businesses have to be involved, community members, and yes, the government. And everyone has to have a shared vision for where we need to be. Is it going to be difficult to implement a customized model of education? Of course it is. But I've seen the sort of impact that it can have. I've seen a school populated with nothing but students who were kicked out of the local high school. These students had been incarcerated, they'd been violent with teachers, they were pregnant, they were working multiple jobs to support their younger siblings. And as one of the teachers there told me, once they get here and they realize they're driving their own learning, it's like magic. Suddenly we're not the enemy anymore and all those discipline problems go away. So it can work, but it just can't be solitary schools here and there. The name of this conference is Daring Greatly. In order for us to have a true transformation of the system, we're going to have everyone on board saying this is the sort of system that we need to get to. I invite you to join me. Thank you.